Hey guys, how you doing? It's your pal Joey T from the Cartoon.P. I know what you're thinking. It's Saturday. Where's the latest Cartoon Palooza review? Well, here's the thing. It's October and it's Halloween, and I want to make the Halloween reviews this year really good, so I'm going to take an extra week to work on those reviews. But in the meantime, I wanted to talk about something that a lot of people have been talking about this week, last week, something that's been talking around in animation, and that's the animated series Big Mouth. I have yet to see the series Big Mouth, but the first thing that I hear when people talk about Big Mouth is the animation. It's a very crude animated show and it's keeping people away from seeing it, but from the sounds of it, it's actually a good series. So it had me thinking about crude humor in relation to animation, specifically crude animation. That's why this video isn't focused on Big Mouth. Big Mouth is something to talk about. It's a topic to talk about, mostly in the subject matter, whereas it's like, I'm not going to watch this show because it doesn't look good. Yeah, but there are plenty of great animated shows where the animation isn't good, but it's still good to watch. There's something else bringing people back in for it to be considered a good show. The animation doesn't have to dictate how well a show is going to be. That's why I wanted to make this vlog. I want to talk specifically about adult animation and how it impacts crude animation, because crude, simple animation seems to work well for a lot of animated shows that are aimed for adults. Does it apply to every animated show and animated movie? Technically not, but it does focus on the humor, and that's what I want to focus on. So back when I talked about 8 Crazy Nights, I mentioned that the film was very well animated, but that it didn't support this type of humor. There was a lot of cursing, there was a lot of frat boy humor, and it just didn't support this very well animation. And trust me, it's very well animated. I know the guy who directed the movie on Twitter. He seems like a great person, and I'm going to say it again. The animation is animated like a Disney film. It just doesn't supply this type of humor. And then I brought up South Park as a comparison because that's what the humor was trying to go for. Very crude humor. Why does it apply better to South Park than it does for 8 Crazy Nights? Truth be told, when it looks like a joke, it's going to feel like a joke. That is to say, as crude as South Park is, there is effort put into it, specifically in the timing and the jokes and the writing. Trey and Matt, they put in a lot of effort in what they work in, and it does show. I think it's just that when talking about this type of humor, it's not the best animation out there. It just seems to support the fast timing and the humor that they're going for. And especially with the work pace this show goes at, it's got to have some cutbacks in some areas. It just so happens to accentuate the humor when something doesn't look as good, especially if the subject matter isn't good. And with Big Mouth, it's the same argument I've heard with a show like Mr. Pickles. If you don't know, Mr. Pickles is an animated show on Adult Swim, and it's very crude, it's very weird out there, and it's very much Adult Swim. The thing about it though, as terrible as the animation is on Mr. Pickles, you gotta give him some credit. I would much rather see the animation like that on Mr. Pickles than if they were to go for something very well animated. It would make me sick, it would make me vomit, it would be a little bit too hard to digest. While the show does do that pretty well, if they went the extra yard, it would just feel flat out uncanny. And I think that's what worked about a show like Mr. Pickles, in that it didn't try to go that extra yard because they knew they were trying to at least be viewable to some people. I'm not trying to say animate like crap and make it for adults, therefore it's going to work. That's not as simple as it is. If that were the case, 12 Ounce Mouse would be like the greatest animated show of all time. That is not true. It just so happens when something is crude, and it's talking about something very crude, and it looks crude, it just seems to complement it better. Whereas if you look at an epic movie or something very well animated, it's going to have a very epic tone to it. This month, I'm talking about the film Hell and Back. When I first saw this film, I hated it, I didn't like it. But then a second time, I'm not going to say what I think about it now, but I think it's worth watching a review when it comes out later this month. And it goes with this whole argument about animation being crude, dealing with the crude humor. Something with a slower frame rate or something that doesn't utilize like great backgrounds all the time may actually work if that type of humor supports it. What about Mike Judge? Mike Judge has been making very crude animated shows for years. Shows that didn't even use like a lot of animation. Like in Beavis and Butthead, they would use music videos in the middle of it, but that's part of the clever and the satire because it deals with these, you know, weird kids, so you're going to have this weird looking world. And it just so happened that style worked for it. And it also worked to Mike Judge's limitations. He wasn't a classically trained animator. He wanted to break into the film industry, and he knew some animation, and he knew how to draw and paint, but he wasn't like, you know, an expert at it. And it just so happened to work with his type of humor, and he's pretty much made a career out of it. At the end of the day, I just want people to go into something and not judge it just by how it looks. I mean, that's kind of how it always is, but the argument that people have been having about this show just doesn't make sense when for years this crude humor does work for crude animation. And I think it's only worth giving it a chance. I'm going to even give it a chance if I got the time. I'm doing all this work here and there, including, as you can see, I don't know if you can see it over there, Inktober at my drawing table. I'm doing some ink drawings this month. Every day for the month of October, I'll be doing a new drawing focusing on ink. I highly recommend you check it out. It's a cool little project I'm doing. I'm putting a story to every single of these drawings so that I put it together into a bigger story. Why don't you go on my Instagram, check it out, follow me throughout this month, because it's a really great challenge. I highly recommend you check it out. I will see you guys next week on the Cartoon Palooza.